Science Gallery Melbourne celebrates and acknowledges the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we work, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and acknowledge First Nations people as our first artists and scientists. My name is Tanaya Joshi, and I'm coming to you from Waywurrung and Wadurung country in the west of Melbourne, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. It is vitally important that we acknowledge and understand what it means to be living on the unceded lands of the sovereign First Nations people of this country. As a migrant, I'm deeply aware that I'm living on the lands of the oldest continuing culture, and I pay my respects to First Nations people for being the stewards of this country despite efforts to erase their culture. I invite you, the listeners, to also acknowledge and understand the lands on which you are joining us from tonight. It is with that sentiment that I welcome everyone to the 2021 Hugh Williamson Lecture with Varsha Yajman. Tonight, I'll be your host. I am a science communicator, writer, and performer. I am also a member of SciCurious, an advisory group of young and curious people active within the Science Gallery. I have always been a lover of the sciences, from watching David Attenborough documentaries and dreaming of being an astronaut as a child, to participating in science Olympiads and completing my science undergraduate research thesis in infectious diseases. The sciences have been a core part of my identity. I continue this love for the sciences through my current studies in the Masters of Environment and Sustainability, very relevant for tonight. And I work at Earthwatch Australia, which is a sustainability not-for-profit. Along with my love for the sciences, I've always held admiration and appreciation for the arts. In South Asian cultures, the arts are the lifeblood of gatherings, storytelling, and self-expression. I have been a dancer of Bharatanatyam, a South Indian classical dance form, for almost as long as I can remember. Whilst the sciences built my appreciation for logic, reasoning, and the interconnectedness of our systems, dance and the arts have taught me how to reflect, observe, and critique society, and have given me the confidence to speak and to write. So it's no surprise that I ended up at the Science Gallery, a place where both the sciences and the arts come together to explore concepts and worldviews in unique ways. Tonight, we're looking at the worldviews which are not afforded sufficient time or consideration, particularly in the Australian media. The problem is this: our planet faces an increasingly severe set of climate, biodiversity, and water security challenges. At the heart of these challenges lies inequity. Inequity in wealth, in power, in gender, access, and in race. The solution to these challenges is nothing short of a fundamental upheaval of our way of life, stopping the burning of fossil fuels, reducing our consumption, and centering the voices which have long been excluded from decision-making narratives of the most influential countries on this planet. We, as those living on sovereign First Nations land, must do better in centering the voices of First Nations people, but also the voices of our migrant and refugee communities, if we are ever to imagine, plan, and implement genuine system-changing solutions to the climate crisis. This evening, we will contribute to the conversation with climate advocate and activist Varsha Yajman, who will be joining us in a short while. Varsha will speak of her experience as a South Asian climate advocate, after which we'll bring it back to a Q&A with myself. Before we hear from Varsha, though, we have a short message from a trustee of the Hugh Williamson Foundation.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Newton, one of the trustees of the Hugh D.T. Williamson Foundation. And together with the other trustees, I warmly welcome you all to the annual Hugh Williamson Lecture for 2021. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which I am recording this message, the Wurundjeri people, and I pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. The Hugh Williamson Foundation is an inaugural supporter of Science Gallery Melbourne, and as part of this, we have helped to establish the Hugh Williamson Lecture. Our foundation supports a broad range of impactful programs here in Victoria. We have a keen interest in supporting organisations which enhance our beliefs and understandings around the arts, leadership, education, the environment, and community well-being. Indigenous knowledge and practice are key parts of this and are important for our future. Tonight's lecture and conversation will demonstrate the importance of providing a platform for youth climate action now and into the future. This fits very well here at Science Gallery Melbourne, an organisation that both believes that young people have the creative power to tackle the world's biggest challenges and which therefore also encourages big conversations like the one this evening. I am very pleased now to introduce the speakers for tonight. Varsha Yajman, a 19-year-old university student and climate advocate, and Science Gallery Melbourne SciCurious member, Tanaya Joshi. I am very much looking forward to hearing Varsha and Tanaya talk about what is indeed one of, if not the most important topics of our time. Welcome to the Hugh Williamson Lecture for 2021.
Thank you for your inspiring message from the Hugh Williamson Foundation. The Foundation has been a long-time supporter of the Science Gallery and has enabled a lot of the excellent work the gallery has done to date. Their support has also enabled us to conduct the event tonight. The topic for this evening's lecture is Beyond Greta, Exploring Race in Climate Change Advocacy, and we'll be hearing from Varsha Yajman on her experiences in the climate activism space. Varsha is nothing short of brilliant. I must confess, tonight is a bit of a fangirl moment for me as I get to meet someone who is such a force for good in the face of the climate crisis. She's a university student, a podcaster, an advocate for climate justice and mental health. As a coordinator at SUPNA, a South Asian climate solidarity network, and a paralegal at Equity Generation Lawyers, she brings a wealth of experience in challenging the status quo on the climate crisis. Along with this, she's a powerhouse campaigner. She has been an organiser for the School Strike for Climate and the Australian Youth Climate Coalition. Varsha brings her cultural heritage from Bengaluru to India in her work. She has spoken about the complications of her connection to culture, home country, and heritage within the climate space in Assembly, a Malala Fund publication. Tonight, we'll be discussing those complexities, as well as the advantages and shortcomings of climate activism in Australia, and how our race affects our ability to navigate this space. The faces of climate advocates in national and international media often look nothing like ours. Much like many people of colour, Varsha has lived experience in being the only one in a room, sitting around a table or on a panel. This tokenistic representation can be toxic and even reductive in the movement for progress. Varsha will speak to tokenism and how allies can move beyond this and move towards genuine inclusion, and how the strengths of South Asian cultures and peoples can be utilised in a movement for a safer planet. In the interest of being genuine, we won't just be focusing on the good bits of South Asian culture and heritage, although we do have plenty of praises to sing. With the rise of eco-anxiety, a genuine reaction in many people, particularly young people, in the face of an increasingly unstable planet, we're conscious that it is important to talk openly about the mental health of people of colour. Varsha will be talking about mental health, the stigma against discussing it within our communities, and how that has impacted her journey and advocacy to date in her presentation. Tonight's conversation doesn't have to be just between you and me and Varsha. It can go beyond the confines of tonight. We really encourage you to use the hashtag #BeyondGreta to share your thoughts and experiences as you listen to tonight's lecture. And be sure to tag Science Gallery. That's at Science Gal Mel, SCIGALMEL, when you do share your thoughts, your photos, your ideas on social media. Well, I won't delay any longer, and I'll introduce Varsha to share her thoughts with us now.
Thank you so much, Tanaya. That was probably the best introduction I've ever had. My ego is soaring through the roof. Thank you so much, and thank you so much to Science Gallery and the Hugh Williamson Foundation for having me. I'm so excited and just really honored to be able to speak about a lot of topics that I actually have never talked about before. So yeah, just extremely excited to be here. And I'll now share my screen for the presentation. There we go. So as Tanaya said, my name is Varsha Yajman, and today I'm going to be talking about navigating activism and mental health as a South Asian Australian woman. But before I get started with anything, I do want to acknowledge that I am currently on the land of the Darug and Gurungai people, and sovereignty was never ceded, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I also want to acknowledge that living and working on unceded Indigenous land, South Asians also inherit settler privileges. So while we demand visibility, it really can't be done in good faith without listening to and learning from Black peoples of so-called Australia. So this is something significant, even though I'm talking about how important South Asian voices are, Indigenous priorities really, really do take the first place. So the way that I'd love to go about tonight's lecture or presentation, whatever you want to call it, is first talking about a little bit of my journey in the climate movement. Don't want to bore anyone with it. And then kind of go into the tokenistic aspects of it and some of the barriers I faced and what we need to see. And then talking about mental health and what changes we need there as well. So I'll dive right in to my journey in the climate movement. So I joined the Australian Climate Coalition in 2018, and they had a student climate leadership program. So my school sent around this link, and I clicked on it. I signed up for the program thinking that maybe I'll meet some people and it'll be a bit of fun. And I went to a predominantly white high school. So entering the AYCC was probably the most diverse space I've been in like 5 or 6 years. And it was incredible being a 15, 16-year-old and then seeing a bunch of people of color really passionate about something that I didn't even know was that close to home, talking about the Adani mine, talking about politics in a way that I feel like I would be able to talk openly at home with my family, but not really having that opportunity at school, having to fit into the model minority. And the need to fit into this model minority was always kind of like, you need to get the best grades, and then therefore you'll fit into what a brown person would be, what we see on TV shows like The Big Bang Theory. It's always this brown person being really intelligent and kind of sitting and studying and not having social skills, when that's really not the case. So for me, the advocacy space was like a breath of fresh air. It felt like a new avenue, a new pathway. But to be quite honest, after joining the AYCC and then going into School Strike for Climate after that, I didn't really feel as represented. So I had some amazing moments, and these are all photos from 2019. The one at the top right corner is the first action that I ever emceed. And I don't know if you can tell, but a lot of the people in the crowd are white. It's mainly white. This event was when we were bringing together people across Sydney to form local groups in their communities. So I was lucky enough to be part of a local group in my own community, but I was the only woman of color. I was the only person of color. And this was frustrating, but I didn't recognize it at the time. And then we had the global school strike for climate. Again, this photo here of us standing together, it's so lovely and beautiful, but it was, again, I was one of two people of color there. And we didn't really get the same opportunities that people who were not people of color got. And a lot of the times it felt quite difficult to say anything because you'd see people getting book deals, you'd see people doing so many amazing things. And while I do acknowledge that I had significant privilege in getting so many opportunities, I always felt like something was wrong with me. And I always thought, I must not be good enough. I must not be speaking articulately enough. They've just got something about them that is so much better than me. And while I do acknowledge that I have my flaws and I may not be the most articulate, I now realize that a lot of that is due to the fact that it's just racism at the end of the day, that I'm a person of color and I don't fit the media's narrative of being a young white woman. And that's something that I've had to grapple with and deal with. But I kind of want to touch on when these realizations actually came into my mind. So these are photos from 2020. And 2020 was probably the most pivotal year for me. It was a year that I kind of put the pieces together. And I owe most of this to the Black Lives Matter protests that really took an upturn and really became the forefront as it should have been for such a long time. But this was a time that I realized the amount of privilege I had in comparison to Indigenous people on this land. And I also realized the systemic racism that we face. And I realized the microaggressions, like the squiggly line under my name every time I type it in, and the autocorrect that puts it to Marsha instead of Varsha. And it was realizing that I was able to also recognize the amount of barriers that I faced in activism and what that really did to me, what that did to my confidence, never being part of the debating team at school, never being selected for certain media opportunities. I realized a lot of that did come down to the color of my skin, and that's something I can't change. So this was also the year that I was lucky enough to meet some amazing fellow South Asian climate activists and start co-founding a group called Sapna South Asian Climate Solidarity. And I've got some a little bit more information on the next slide, but I just want to talk about a few of these photos as well. So on the corners here, these are two of the first actions that I did where I talked about my story as a South Asian woman. And it was absolutely incredible to talk about my time in India, where I'm from, and what those memories mean to me, and how climate change does affect those countries differently. And having a sign that was written in Hindi was surreal. I never thought I'd ever see that, and it was just incredible. And being able to go to an Indian restaurant and talk about activism and politics with people who understood the effects of racism was also incredible. And then in this bottom left photo, this was when I went to Germany to speak at the Siemens annual general meeting. And that was a great opportunity. But even there was elements of tokenism for sure. And the thing is, until 2020, I'd really never talked about being a person of color. And I don't think I'd ever been told to as well. When I'd been doing so much of media training, been told to tell my personal story and my personal narrative, being a person of color never came into place. It was always, I'm young and the world is going to burn up. And while those two things are really true and are very important to say, it's also important to me that I recognize my own identity and my own role in this movement. So a little bit about Sapna. This is our logo, which I'm so incredibly proud of. One of the group members, who's also an amazing artist, designed this, Jessica Harwood, incredible artist. And essentially, Sapna South Asian Climate Solidarity It stands for a vision for climate solutions, grounded in justice and the hope for a global climate movement that tells stories of South Asian communities. So Sapna means a dream in South Asian languages. So I speak Kannada, and in Kannada we say Shwapna, which also means dream. So it's a bit of a variant on that, which is just beautiful, and it really encapsulates what we want. So Sapna is a collective for climate justice for the South Asian diaspora. We're an intergenerational team of activists, artists, and writers. And what we really aim to do is to tell the story through platform sharing for their struggles and visions, and collaborating with this mainstream climate movement to make its narrative inclusive and intersectional. So the spaces that I've been in, while there are some niches in these organizations that are quite diverse, generally they are underpinned by really Eurocentric climate justice ideas. And what this means is that we're not really acknowledging Indigenous people, whether that be Indigenous people of Australia or the Indigenous people of South Asian countries. So in India, that's the Adivasi and Dalits. And that raises a significant problem, because then we're not able to get what we need. We don't have people-centric climate solutions that benefit communities. And what Sapna aims to do is to organize the South Asian diaspora to hold governments in the industrialized world accountable. So what this means to me is to learn and to really research. And I might actually go into the segments on tokenism now. And yeah, just a little photo, just a little side tangent here. That's a photo of me doing Q&A in 2019. So I had the absolute privilege to do that, and was selected to do the high school special panels. And this was something that I never thought I'd even apply for. I didn't really think I would get it. And then I did. But then when I did, the comments right before I was about to go on the show, because they released the panelists the day before on Facebook, a lot of the comments were, oh, she's just there because they need to fulfill diversity, or she's just there because she's a lefty and they just need that. So to me, this is a true symbol of tokenism, because I was the only woman of color, and this has happened multiple times. So I guess a great segue into what I want to talk about is this dialogue around justice and intersectionality. And Elizabeth Yim-Pierre, she says an amazing quote, is that you can't treat one part of the problem without the other because it's so systemic. So to me, this speaks to race, this speaks to economic status, this speaks to climate justice, because at the end of the day, these are all so interconnected. The fact that we're not able to look beyond Australia, the fact that we're so wrapped up in our own bubble, makes it really difficult for us to actually understand and define what climate justice is. Instead, what we're actually talking about is just a few steps towards sustainability. And to me, that isn't what climate justice is. To me, climate justice is involving more communities and also researching and learning. In my job at Sapna now, the biggest thing that I've had, the biggest experience that I've had in my entire climate movement that has meant so much to me is actually being told to do research and to learn. And that's something that I don't think I've really been told before. And surely I've been told to, read a few articles or to watch a video about First Nations justice, but I've never been told to make a table about the history of environmentalism. And that's what I've been told to do in my role. And that's been the most eye-opening experience, because I've really been able to understand that environmentalism dates back decades and decades in countries like South Asia. But rather, we keep saying that this white savior complex needs to come and, save the world from all the tragedies of climate catastrophes. And that's really not the case. What we need to be doing is to listen to these communities instead. So that's what I'd really love to see from allies, is instead of just getting people there for tokenism and quote unquote diversity, have people of color, have Indigenous people, and make this diverse, and actually get their insights and take their knowledge and take it on board into your future campaigns. I think we have this tendency to say, oh, well, we have a limited amount of time, so we need to do everything we can. But you're not going to know what you actually need to achieve if you don't have the knowledge to do it. And I also think it's really important to diversify your actions and to diversify these avenues of climate justice. So for one, a lot of people of color, a lot of people for multiple reasons suffer from fears of protesting. Police brutality is a very real thing. And I've been where police. Oh no, I think, am I frozen? Am I back? I think I'm back. Sorry. So police brutality is a very real thing, and it's something that a lot of people suffer from, whether that be for the color of your skin, whether that be for your disabilities, that be your gender. And I know the fear of it. I've been surrounded by police in situations of protest, and it's made me want to quit protesting at times. It is that terrifying because being a woman of color, it's not, there's just a big risk that you're going to be the first to be fined. And it's a terrible feeling. So really understanding that and respectfully conversing with these communities and understanding what they have capacity to do, because a lot of the time, people of color labor is way more intensive. A lot of the time they will be immigrants and they will be struggling with 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. They may be from lower socioeconomic areas. And there's just significant barriers in being in places like media because there's fears of deportation. There's fears of speaking out against the Adani mine. And that brings me to also just being educated on the fact that this rhetoric around renewables is good and coal is bad is not true for South Asian countries. In countries like India, you have to deal with the caste system. You have to deal with an energy crisis. You have to deal with a corrupt government. And while there is corruption in countries like the US, like the UK, like Australia, it's definitely not to the same extent as South Asian countries. So those are real things that we need to understand. And that's what organizations like Sapna are trying to do, to make this a community-led solution-driven action. That's what climate justice really is. So now I'm going to be jumping into mental health. And I know that's a bit of a, how does this even connect? But South Asian culture has so much to bring in these areas, and the barriers that we face are really significant. And I've personally struggled with anxiety and an eating disorder. So for me, seeking help and just kind of navigating that space was really difficult. So this is one of the first times I've ever talked about mental health openly like this. And it's something that I'm really trying to do more, because if I can just help one person have a conversation, see a psychologist, whatever that may be, I think that would just make me so happy. So I really hope somebody's able to take away something from this. I recently wrote an article about my experience with an eating disorder and the effect that race had on it. So for me, going to a predominantly white high school and not being able to fulfill that model minority, I thought that if I just looked like the other people in my class, like the other girls, then somehow I would be able to fit in. So the quote on the screen, I leaned into an aspirational ideal of honorary whiteness, which I thought I would achieve if I ate salads, skipped meals, and if I was just skinnier. And at that time in high school, I never really recognized the intersection of race and my eating disorder. To me, they were two separate things. But in all honesty, it was because I wasn't able to feel like I fit into my Indian identity, nor the white culture that existed around me, that kind of led me to this path of trying to just fit into somewhere, no matter where that was. And it was only recently that I realized that race really underlied a lot of my symptoms. And coming from a South Asian family, a lot of the times I didn't even recognize that I could have symptoms of an eating disorder, because saying you need help, that I have an eating disorder, is something very uncommon. It's almost alien in many migrant families, and it certainly wasn't mine. And this is coming from a position where I have family that, truly loves me, that respects me, that has gotten me the help. I've been so lucky to have my mother just kind of like help me throughout my own journey. And I know how hard it must have been for her to accept it and to also come to terms with it. So I'm really, really lucky. But for a lot of people, they don't even have that. So having an understanding of the difficulties that comes from a person of color going through mental health struggles is really, really important, and how that's so different. So another layer that really added to my own struggles within eating disorders is that for most South Asians I know, there's a feeling of guilt around the seeking of mental health help. There's this strange sensation in knowing how much more privileged you are than many back home, and that makes you feel like you should be nothing but grateful and happy all the time. So you hear about the success stories back home, those who made it without most of the things you had, and the guilt sets in. And something that I was constantly told throughout the initial stages of my eating disorder is there's so many people back home who can't even afford food, and you're complaining about this choice of eating or not to eat. And I recognize the privilege that I have in making that choice. It's such a first world problem, but that idea really gives you so much of guilt. It's like, I don't have any issue. It's just something in my head. But a lot of the times it isn't. And it is something that you actually need to seek out help for. So I wrote another article for Ramona magazine recently, and it was about the interplay between seeking a maths tutor or a tutor for any subject versus seeking a psychologist. So for much of my life, and I know for so many, seeking mental health support can feel out of balance because of ethnicity and culture. The reality, however, is that mental health support is just like needing a maths tutor. It wasn't created for a demographic, it was created for support. And seeing a psychologist was something that I kept hidden for such a long time. I would lie about it. The only person who knew was my mother and my GP, and that was it. And now it's something that I speak quite openly about, because when I would look to online communities for eating disorder support or anxiety support, it was always white women who would be talking about their journey. And while I do appreciate them sharing their stories, as I know how difficult it can be, a lot of their advice never really resonated with me, because they would be like, oh, just tell your parents this, or contact a Lifeline support line or whatever. And I would be really terrified to have these conversations with family sometimes, because it just wasn't that easy. And now I'm really lucky to have that amazing relationship with my mom. But at the start, it is hard because she didn't grow up in that environment. And I didn't grow up in an environment where those conversations were always open. And I am really lucky to have a progressive family, actually. So the difficulties for other migrants is exacerbated. But for me, talking about it now is something that is just fundamental, because being a person of color and seeing other people of color talk about their journeys has helped me open up, and I hope helps other people open up as well. So I wanted to also touch on the changes needed in these areas. Firstly, culturally competent support. This is just absent in whatever help that I'd seek. So medical professionals, seeking even South Asian medical professionals, a lot of the time they'll just say, this is a phase, you're a teenager, you'll get over it. It's not always the case. I know a lot of us, I think diet culture just perpetuates us, and toxic productivity, hustle culture, anxiety, there's something that have become these buzzwords, but we don't understand the depths of these effects on people, and how it actually stops them from living their day-to-day lives. So having professionals who are trained to actually deal with people of color, to deal with Indigenous people and how they're struggling with these mental illnesses is so important, because we think that just because we can't see them physically, or just because someone doesn't look a certain way to fit these criteria of what a mental health illness is, they don't have it. And that's the thing, it's an invisible illness. It's not a broken leg that, you can just heal with crutches. So it's really important to have that in schools as well. I was lucky enough to go to a public school that did have mental health professionals come in from time to time from organizations like Headspace. But yet again, they were always white men for some reason, or a lot of the time, even if they were white women, still not culturally competent support. And again, they would say, call a Lifeline support line. And my first thought would be, oh my gosh, that number is going to be tracked, and then I'm not going to be able to actually seek out the help I need, and this is going to end terribly. And that's the thing. That's why we also need to make sure that our support is diverse. And another thing I wanted to mention is parenting. A lot of the time, there's a tendency to blame the parents if a child has some sort of mental illness, if they're not getting the support that they need, if they're not able to have an open and honest conversation with their family. But the truth is, I have a family that is really progressive, who's very supportive, who loves me and respects me, and who I love and respect. But they didn't grow up in this environment. So it's really not on them. And it really frustrates me when people just suddenly shift the blame to a whole culture in itself, because I don't blame South Asian culture, but I blame the conversations and the stigma that surround it. And that's something that needs to change. And that change comes from media representation a lot of the time. So understanding the difference between representation and tokenism and what that actually means. Some of the only shows that I've seen that actually represent South Asian women seeking mental health support is Never Have I Ever on Netflix, and that was pretty recent. Other than that, any show about eating disorders has been movies like To the Bone, where it's a stick-thin white girl and her entire life is glamorized because suddenly she's like fallen in love and meets this boy and does all these things. But that is not the reality of mental health illness. And I'm sure anyone who's experienced it, even just experienced anxiety on a very surface level, knows that it's not so glamorized. It's not looking out a window while music is playing in the background, but it's very real feelings of fear and uncertainty and not knowing when you're going to be able to escape these feelings. So just greater representation in that, and also just understanding that if you're going to incorporate people from different cultures into whatever campaign you're running, whatever media segment you're running, make sure that you're getting their insights. As I said before, take them for their knowledge, don't take them for their color or take them for their disability or sexuality. It's really more than that. And I finally wanted to share this slide of things I've been doing today. One of the things that I'm most proud of is the podcast that my friend Tiara De Silva and I co-host and founded this year during the pandemic, called Not to Be Controversial. So we talk about the talked about and taboo with a little bit of a South Asian perspective, because we really want to be able to create a community of South Asians, of young South Asians, to have a space to go to talk about issues like sex education, like mental health, like dating, whatever it is, and just have a space where they feel safe and they feel comfortable, and just young people in general. So we really aim to be transparent and authentic. And I know that word authenticity is overused, but we're trying to do our best. And other opportunities are just, continuing as a school striker from time to time and dipping in and being able to give my knowledge and seeing that space become more diverse. And also just reading and learning as much as I can. And being a paralegal at Equity Generation Lawyers has been amazing as well. And to see a woman of color, Anjali Sharma, lead one of our cases, be the lead applicant, has just been so beautiful. And to hear Sharma and others as a case name is I could not be more happy about that. And just working with brands and just trying to do what I can, I guess, as a woman of color, and also just recognizing the amount of privilege that I have has really been the most pivotal thing in my journey. I think recognizing my privilege has taught me that I'm so fortunate to get the opportunities that I do and to make the most use of them that I can. So thank you again for having me, and so excited for the Q&A with Tanaya.
Thank you so much, Varsha, for sharing your experience. So much of that resonated with me. Listening is absolutely the first step in acting. I have just been doing a course quietly on the side on how to be a better active listener. And it has changed the conversations that I'm having, and both in work, at uni, and also within my personal life. So listening to those points you made about listening to community, listening to the voices that aren't heard very often, and listening to understand rather than listening to respond, absolute gold. We might just delve into some questions now and go a bit deeper on some points of significance. First off, I'll bring us back to the climate activism points you raised. You've been through many different forms of activism, and I personally am yet to get into the activism space. As someone who is engaged in sustainability in work and study, but not yet in physical activism, I'm getting there. But what is one piece of advice that you'd share with climate advocates or climate activists in Australia, or someone looking to be a climate activist? Considering tonight's topic, I might also ask that, particularly for people of colour, if there's any specific advice you might give them.
Yeah, so I think the first step is just to start. Like, I know that there's this kind of feeling, there's almost this like ego and pride, I think, that gets in the way of, I don't have as many followers as this person, so I could never be an activist. So like, I need a massive social media platform. And I think I felt like that for a while too. Like, what does a legitimate activist mean? And how do you actually define yourself as that? And honestly, I think those labels are just, they're frustrating. I tend to use them sometimes because I don't really know how else to put it. I'm like, I care about the world, I'm doing my part. And that's kind of it. And I think that's really all that matters. And people will recognize you for that. And at the end of the day, I think just doing something that you're really passionate about and knowing that you can make a difference is so important. And particularly for people of color, I think a lot of the times we have anxieties about maybe like, oh, if I get involved, I might need to go to a protest and I don't feel safe. Set your boundaries. No one can ever force you into those things. And even if you feel like a bit of FOMO or anything, I just think remembering that you have your boundaries and you know where your safe spaces are, and you can join social media campaigns. There are so many ways to get involved. And I think the pandemic really taught us the power of social media. So just going on that, I think that's a really great question.
Yeah, I agree. The bit about not being comfortable to attend physical protests, for example, I think what you spoke about media representation, I think is just as important for us to be able to see in the media that there's different forms of activism, big and small, and each have their own role, their own part to play. And you can't get to the end, the bigger picture, without each of those bits of activism playing their own role. Yeah, thank you for that. I might move on to the challenges of mental health. So switching tack a little bit, but still sitting within tonight's topic. First, thank you for sharing your story. South Asian culture has long been about community, about sharing stories, and our women have driven that support for so long. I think colonialism, living in a Western country, all of that plays into our access with mental health support. And I really appreciate that you talked about the fact that South Asian culture isn't necessarily to blame for the issues that young people of colour might have with gaining mental health support. It's more the way it's talked about, the way it's represented, and how stereotypes can fuel themselves the more often you repeat them. That being said, at the present moment, I think there is still an onus on young people to bring the conversation about mental health onto the table. So often I consider it in my own home as something that I will have to talk about. I don't expect my parents to ever raise it or to discuss the issue themselves. And that can get pretty tiring, to always be the person driving that conversation or trying to convince your friends and loved ones to listen to whatever mental health issues you might be going through. What would you say to the parents or guardians who are watching this presentation tonight? What would be something that you'd say to them?
I think, first of all, I kind of understand where parents are coming from in the sense that they can't really accept it because, like, I have a fair few, like, health professionals in my family, and I think there's a sense of being able to accept other people who struggle with mental illness, but not necessarily people in their own family, because it's like, that wouldn't happen to my child, that would never. And it's so rational when you think about it, because you haven't grown up in an environment where mental health illness is talked about at all. So coming into a country where, first of all, there's just massive cultural shifts, and then having the onus to now bring up this conversation and like have the sex talk with your child, like, no, that's just not a thing. So it's really, really difficult. And I think the most important thing for parents would be just to listen sometimes. Like, I don't think children are necessarily after advice, but just somebody who's going to listen and I think validate those emotions. And if I feel like just referring them to even a psychologist, and I know that can seem like a big step because that's almost like, oh, we're seeking medical help now and something's really wrong. But so many people go to psychologists, therapists. It's really not just a thing that sick people do or anything like that. And I think breaking that stigma is so important. It really is, to me, it's the same thing as getting a tutor for any sort of subject. It's just helping you focus and helping you get yourself back together when you feel like you need that bit of extra support. So yeah, I think just listening is key.
Yeah, I totally agree. So many times my friends and I have discussed mental health within ourselves, but the topic of broaching it with our parents is often a hurdle because we feel like we might get shut down right away.
Yeah. And I think you need to get shut down a few times, honestly, to like, I think the way it works is you almost need to weave it into a conversation sometimes. I don't know, like now with my mum, for instance, it's super casual because we talk about it so much and like it's really, really great in that sense. But it took a while. And I think just like that level of acceptance, because it's kind of like if you were introduced to a completely foreign idea, how long would it take for you to get used to it, let alone a loved one dealing with it? So I think it is also about understanding that perspective, which I know is difficult when you're already going through things, but yeah.
Yeah. I think you're not wrong in saying that we have a part to play as well in understanding where our parents or where our loved ones are coming from when it comes to understanding mental health, on top of all of the other challenges they might face as they move to a new country, adjust to different cultures. And I think it comes back to mutual respect, right? Being able to respect and understand everyone's situation. And even if you might not directly understand, giving a little bit of empathy can go a long way.
Yeah, and I think, sorry. I think if you're not able to seek that sort of support from parents, at the end of the day, do go to your GP, because obviously you don't want to let things go on the way they are if you're not in a good place. And I know that some people do find it quite difficult to even approach the subject with family. So yeah, do go to your local GP and just get a start. And it does remain confidential. Like I always used to be quite suspicious and be like, oh, well, they're just going to call my parents up and tell them, but it does tend to remain confidential as well. So if you need that extra bit of support, please do go and seek that.
Yeah, good advice. I agree with doctor confidentiality. They're pretty strict on that one. The last question is a bit, not so much out of left field, but diverging a little bit from tonight's topic. I personally cannot recall the last time I've seen a chat like this on a platform like the Science Gallery Melbourne, somewhere that's a predominantly white institution, which is giving voices to young people of colour, to young First Nations people. And I think the way you said on Q&A, where you were the token person in the room, this has given us a chance to relate and not be the token people in the room. Yeah. And so what would you say to someone who is an ally? So someone who sees themselves adjacent to the movement of, rather than adjacent to the movement, I should say, adjacent to the people at the centre of the movement. What's some advice you can give them or something that you can say to them to enable them to do better in the sphere of media diversity? So seeing the faces like you and I on our mainstream TV or mainstream news.
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to say, when I saw that you were hosting this, Tanaya, I was so happy. It's like I get to speak with another woman of color. Like it's my absolute favorite thing to have a space where it's other women of color with me and not just like me and then maybe another woman of color and then everyone else being white. Like it just feels very frustrating because it's like, I know you picked both of us because you needed a person of color on the panel. So what I would say is, first of all, there's a real issue with allyship sometimes that in the name of allyship, a lot of people tend to speak for other people. So for instance, I see this a lot with like Indigenous protests or like even people of color. You will have white speakers talking about how important it is to put these people who are on the front lines of the climate crisis and make sure that we acknowledge them and their struggles. But why can't you just bring a person of color to speak instead? Or why can't you just bring an Indigenous person to speak instead and actually talk about their experiences authentically? I think there's a real issue of kind of in the name of allyship and in the name of trying to move forward and plan a protest as quick as possible that we tend to forget the fundamentals of authentic and accountable activism. And that's something that I think is increasingly important. And as we see South Asian countries and just just countries where there are significant populations of people of color, of Indigenous people, it's really, really important to make sure that you're actually taking their knowledge and not just kind of speaking for them. You're holding space for them and giving them the space to speak for themselves. Because it's not that they don't have the voice, it's just we need to give them the space to use that voice.
Very well put. I definitely agree. I've been in instances where I've seen a panel and I'm like, hello, there is no diversity on this panel. Why are you inviting me to attend this event? And I've heard the excuse, oh, it was just a bit too last minute or a bit too hard, or we had someone drop out. Sorry, we couldn't find anyone else who was a person of color or a First Nations person to swap out onto the panel.
Yeah.
And it makes me laugh because honestly, that just means you didn't try hard enough.
And also the thing is, and also the thing is, like, when they do find a person of color, it will always be the same one who appears again and again at these panels or like these events. They can't seem to find different people of color or different Indigenous people for some reason. Like most of the protests that I will go to, they will have the same Indigenous speaker. And I'm like, surely there's somebody else out there who also wants to share their story, because there's this real stereotyping that like all brown people have the same experience and all Black people have the same experience. And that's not true at all. Like we have 5 different non-POC or non-Indigenous people on the panel. And for some reason, they all are recognized for having a diverse experience. But then the one person of color has the same one as the 1.68 billion population of India. And it's like, that can't be true, right?
Yeah, big time. I think it comes back to what you started with in terms of your points about listening to community for activism, in that you can't think of inclusion as the last checkpoint on your to-do list when you're organising something or organising an event. It's something that has to come at the very start, but then also be infused throughout the entirety of that process. Inclusion isn't a tick box exercise. It absolutely isn't. And I'm also not going to say that it's easy. No. I do think inclusion is a work in itself, because we are working against a system which often, well, it wasn't built with us in mind, but often puts inclusion last. And so all of that being said, is there anything else that you'd like to say in addition to the rest of your remarks?
I think there's a real fear sometimes in starting something. And I think just reminding yourself that everyone starts where you are. I know that some people have more privileges, etc. But at the end of the day, we all start with 0 followers and 0 knowledge and 0 everything. And we have to work our way up. So I think just keeping that in mind and knowing that you can do it, it's just really about finding the space. And sometimes that is difficult, but there are spaces out there like Sapna. And yeah.
How can one join Sapna? I must ask.
So I actually have a slide with a bunch of links. So I might just share my screen really quickly. Okay, so this is the slide with all of the links. So with Sapna, we have an Instagram right now. We've just done a soft launch on there, but we will be doing an amazing launch next year with a website and just a space for people to join. But right now, it's been quite on the down low. We're just trying to get the word out and also build the foundations up ourselves, because building a South Asian organization with literally no foundations because another one doesn't exist in Australia is quite difficult sometimes in terms of the climate movement. But yeah, and also the podcast and everything is on there. So yeah, and feel free to like connect or anything. So open to that. Would love to hear from people. So yeah.
I am hitting follow as soon as this finishes. I might just wrap it up there. I think we've heard really genuine, authentic, and reflective stories tonight. And it's nice to have a chat where people are so eager to talk that they're interrupting each other. I think that's a good sign.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. You've just been so wonderful as a host, and just for the entire gallery and the foundation for even having me. I'm so honored.
Yeah, I will echo that. Thanks to the Hugh Williamson Foundation for their support, Varsha, for your thoughts and perspectives tonight. I think you do leave us a lot to think about and act on. There's so many different avenues you can go down, from learning, listening, researching, and starting by that first step, even if it might seem small, into your foray into climate activism or your own passion points, or whether you're going to think a little bit more about mental health and how that interplays in different families, different societies. Thank you as well to the audience for tuning in. It has been an absolute ride of a night. I've enjoyed myself so much. And thank you to the Auslan interpreters, Therese and Nicole, for interpreting tonight's lecture. Accessibility is so important. I really appreciate it.
And for keeping up with me, probably speaking too fast as well. I really appreciate it.
The Science Gallery Melbourne will be opening its exhibition Mental on 20th of January 2022. I am very, very excited to attend it in person and see all the incredible art that's going to be on display. Keep a close eye. The exhibition and its attended programs will all be free to attend, and bookings should open in January 2022. You can subscribe on the Science Gallery Melbourne website to keep updated. That's www.melbourne.sciencegallery.com, and follow Science Gallery on socials at SCI Gallery MEL on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I know that I'm definitely going to have lots of thoughts going out from tonight. And once again, just to close tonight, I will acknowledge that we are on sovereign First Nations land. This conversation has only been able to happen because Varsha and myself and everyone involved has been able to live on these lands and learn from them. Good night all, and thank you so much for watching.
Thank you.